Marking a first in U.S. history, a former president faces a criminal trial. 34 felony charges against Donald Trump include falsifying business records, concealing information from voters, and paying hush money to an adult film star. Trump says it's all a political ploy to stop him from running in 2024, but prosecutors simply say no one is above the law. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the indictment of Donald Trump. Former U.S. President Donald Trump lashed out this week after pleading not guilty to dozens of felony charges in a New York court. During a primetime address to his supporters, he declared his innocence and attacked the prosecutor and judge presiding over the case. Ironically, though, this case may actually prove the least of his legal worries as he faces several other investigations with potentially more serious consequences. And all of this while running his 2024 presidential campaign.
A turning point in American history. Former President Donald Trump has been charged and is now the first president, former or current, to ever be a criminal defendant. Trump pleaded not guilty, and the indictment against him unsealed. He's charged with 34 counts of falsifying business payments to allegedly hide other crimes. And it's all centered around $130,000 hush money Trump's former attorney paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels to buy her silence just 2 weeks before the 2016 election.
34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
Outside the courthouse is a picture of a divided America, as the former president's supporters and critics traded chows and waved signs.
I'm here to support our president, and I'm also here because our Constitution is being eroded.
The 45th President of the United States and the leading contender of the 2024 Republican nomination returned to his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate following the unprecedented proceedings.
The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
While he may be dismissing this case, his legal woes don't end in New York. There are numerous legal threats looming over the former president. In Georgia, a prosecutor is investigating Trump for his alleged efforts to try and overturn his 2020 election defeat in the state. And a special House of Representatives committee that investigated the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol has urged the Justice Department to pursue at least 4 criminal charges against Trump, including insurrection. There is also the case of his handling of classified documents after leaving office. And as the Republican prepares for a comeback bid for the presidency, he's accusing Democrats of using court cases to try and stop him from winning the 2024 election.
We are a nation in decline, and now these radical left lunatics want to interfere with our elections by using law enforcement. We can't let that happen.
The months ahead will be filled with a mix of court appearances and campaign events for Trump, and could further inflame divisions across the U.S. But as it stands, no conviction can legally prevent Trump from running for president.
So how solid are these 34 felony charges, and what could this case mean politically for both Donald Trump and his opponents? Joining me now to debate that are from Washington, Adolfo Franco. He is a Republican strategist and Donald Trump's former campaign lawyer. From New York, Steve Okun, an attorney who served in the Clinton administration. And from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, we have Jason Osborne. He's a former senior advisor to Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Thanks all so much for joining us. Steve, you are a lawyer. Adolfo, I know you are one as well, but I'll start with Steve here. I need you really to explain as best you can how serious these charges are and how solid this case actually is. Republican pundits are, complaining that it's one charge repeated 34 times and that state prosecutors are bringing state charges to try to prosecute a federal crime as a felony. It doesn't sound like, really, from what I've read, that this case is watertight, so to speak. What do you think?
Well, this case is the opening act of the U.S. justice system holding Donald Trump liable for what he did as president and when he was running for president. So this is going to be the first of probably 3 or 4 cases brought against Donald Trump. So we have to look at it in that context as well. This case in particular is about an illegal conspiracy that Donald Trump led to undermine the integrity of the 2016 election. And so really, it seems like the facts in this case are not in dispute. Phony documents were created to cover up payments to at least 3 different people to help Donald Trump win the presidency in 2016. The legal question is whether or not this is a misdemeanor under New York law for creating those false business records, or whether it is a felony under New York law because those business records were created to help him win the presidency. And that is a question that the jury is going to decide. Is he liable for the felony? He's almost certainly liable for the misdemeanors because that's been proven in other cases. And so we are in a little bit of uncharted waters, but the New York prosecutor's office have repeatedly prosecuted people for phoning up documentation to cover up campaign finance violations. So I don't think it's not a slam dunk, but it's certainly not some novel attempt that's never been done before.
Okay, Adolfo, I saw you kind of sigh for a minute there. What do you think?
Nice try, Steve. First of all, I got to the end of the question. You asked the question, which how successful or how tight this case is. This is a ludicrous case. Well, I'll put the political persecution and the rest of it aside, which of course it is. In terms of just the legal parts of it, my colleague failed to understate 2 or 3 things. First of all, the statute of limitations on this misdemeanors has expired. So they're bringing a case on a statute of limitations issue just procedurally first. Secondly, this is absolutely unprecedented and novel in New York. They're bootstrapping a misdemeanor. This is a state prosecutor who only has authority over state law, not felonies. He has not stated in the indictment what the underlying crime is. This is the worst indictment I have ever read. You're right about it being it's one incident, really, 2, that you can slice up and stack and to say 34. They're not 34. But going back to the procedures here, this is without precedent. This has never been done, bootstrapping a misdemeanor to try to a felony of which he has no jurisdiction over. This is a federal matter. Secondly, Steve did say something that I think was very important. This is part of the persecution of a process and episodes to get Donald Trump without any of the facts involved being relevant. This is just a political agenda.
Okay, let's get into that.
Keep in mind quickly, these matters Steve's referring to were known to the American people in 2016.
Yeah,
They were examined by federal prosecutors. They were examined by this state prosecutor's office. They were discarded. They weren't pursued. And 7 years later, the same case, which has never been pursued by federal or state authorities, is now reopened for only political purposes.
Right. I was going to look at that in just a minute. That's one of the kind of interesting angles here, too. But let me get Jason into the conversation. I mean, Jason, if you want to comment on the legal issues you feel are at play here, you can go ahead. But I wanted to ask you, as, a former Trump supporter that no longer really is, what do you think in this indictment is actually the worst that he did? What do you think people should actually be outraged by?
Well, I mean, I tend to agree with both what Steve and what Adolfo are saying here. And it's not that I'm necessarily not supporting Trump overall. I think his policies were great. I just think he's just too much drama, and I think our country needs to move on. But I am concerned that the appearances of this case are a political persecution in the sense that they just want to get back at the guy. And then when you add in kind of all the offenses that we've seen, from other politicians in this regard, uh, and they're not persecuted or they're not gone after, I mean, it only adds fuel to the fire. I mean, I think both sides are hypersensitive to this, and certainly, I think what Donald Trump is doing right now is fanning those flames as much as he can, and I
But
think
Jason,
if
let
we
me
could just
ask you, when you
tone it down
say,
a notch.
other politicians, haven't been bothered for similar issues, I mean, people haven't forgotten Bill Clinton going down for now, when we look at it today, seemingly much less. So yes, other politicians have been sought after for sometimes charges that are, debatable at best.
I don't recall that Bill Clinton was
What
ever
charges?
tried or
Well, not charge. I'm
indicted.
sorry. I don't want to say
Yeah,
charges. I mean, I'm looking from an observer's,
right.
a voter's point of view, really. When they talk about
Well, this is a legal
political.
With all due respect, this is a legal question.
Okay, but I was
Don't
asking
mis-
Jason more about
don't mislead
Right.
your listeners here.
separate the
I-
legal
and I-
and the political right now, because
Right.
that's why I separated that with Jason. Jason, you're not the lawyer on this panel, forgive me. That's why I was asking you
Thank
more
you.
about, yeah. But you take that as a compliment. Yeah.
I guess in cases like this, yeah. I think what you have to look at is, and I'm not saying, I'm not one of those that are sitting here saying, well, if they're going to go after Trump, they need to go after Hillary for having servers off site, or you have to go after Biden on some of the charges that I know that the Republicans in the House are, quite frankly, I think wasting the time of, and should move on. But there are plenty of other cases in this. I think John Edwards, actually, as I recall, was the only other one that I can remember that actually had charges pressed against him for some of the similar type activities in this. Steve and Adolfo may be able to add more to that. But I think in this case, it is, I've seen a lot of comments about the fact that this was a big mistake on the Democrats' part to have this charge go first. I think that the one that's most dangerous in my mind, I think, is the Georgia stuff. Quite frankly, I think the record stuff in Mar-a-Lago is just BS. Quite frankly, for many
Right.
other reasons, and that's probably another show. But I think this was a mistake for them to go after first. And quite frankly, I think Trump is not going to get a fair trial in New York. Just as if they moved it to Staten Island, I don't necessarily think that the other side would get a fair shot at this. The guy is never going to get a fair trial, no matter where the trial is.
Okay. And by the way, hold
and just-
that thought on the Georgia case, because I want to follow up with that. Okay, Steve, I was going to ask you, if you have an immediate comment, go ahead.
Two quick ones. One to Jason. The Democrats did not bring this case. A prosecutor in Manhattan brought this case. So the Democratic Party did not sit around and say, let's bring this case. A Democrat certainly brought it, but there was no, how is this going to play out politically? And to Adolfo's point, no, the American public did not know at the time of the election that Donald Trump was having alleged affairs with a Playboy model and a porn star. He paid them off through the National Enquirer, through his lawyer, to keep that from coming out. And the prosecutor couldn't bring these charges during the 4 years of his presidency because you can't bring an indictment against a sitting president. So the question for the prosecutor is, okay, it's later down the road. This happened. Should we just forget about it because it's a former president running for president? Or should we bring these types of charges, which we have brought in the past, even though tying this to a federal felony would be different? So I think yes, of course, this is going to play out politically, but don't think of this as the Democratic Party going after Donald Trump. That's not the instance in this case.
Okay.
Well, I guess one question on the statute of limitations issue, but I'm not a lawyer, so you two can answer it better. But I don't think that there's a provision in the law that says that the statute of limitations is waived if the person that's, in this case, Donald Trump, is serving as president for 4 years. I think so that is an important question. I think that the American public are going to want to know.
Yeah. Adolfo, go ahead quickly.
Okay, just a couple of things on the statute of limitations as you brought it up. Absolutely right, Jason, on this. This is just on its face. By the way, Steve, even people in your party say this. Many of them have said bringing this case is a mistake for a variety of reasons, and political and legal. This is about as weak as I've ever seen anything else. I want to make a couple of things very clear. The person, there's a difference between the justice system and prosecutors. There's something called prosecutorial abuse, which I think has happened here, and it happens around the country all the time. The person that's bringing these charges is a Democrat, is a politician, did run for office, and ran for office on a mantra to get Donald Trump. That's justice. And the other cases are also Democrat, including the Attorney General of New York. So the idea for the viewers to understand, the prosecutors in America are political figures, many of them with, as Mr. Bragg will be, with aspirations for higher office. Now,
Okay.
but quickly, with respect to the legal aspects of this, to be clear, is Bill Clinton paid $850,000 in hush money to Paula Jones. He was never prosecuted afterwards. Bill Clinton committed perjury. He was never persecuted. Hillary Clinton, according to Mr. Comey in 2016, had actionable charges that could be brought against her. Mr. Comey said no prosecutor in his or her right mind would bring charges against a leading political figure running for president. Different standard for Republicans, different standard for Democrats.
Okay.
That's the difference here. There's a two-tier justice system.
Yeah, the
And
Comey.
what's going to happen here in the future is political actions are going to be brought against Democrats, just as is being done against President Trump.
Well, they keep doing it back and forth to each other, seemingly, and that's the dirty.
No, they have never done this. No.
Well, I disagree.
This is unprecedented. This is unprecedented.
Okay. Steve, let me ask you, let's be honest here. Donald Trump doesn't really care, if he makes history for impeachments or even criminal trials. In his mind, this all really serves to prove that his enemies are just desperate to bring him down and that they fail every time. So could this actually politically backfire?
I'll tell you, it certainly depends. It depends on how Donald Trump responds to it. And if you look at Donald Trump's response last night when he had his indictment party at Mar-a-Lago, he made it all about himself. He made it how he has been prosecuted. Everybody's going against him. It's all about the lunatic left who are persecuting him, and that he should be reelected because he wants retribution against the deep state, against the Democrats, against the system. It will be very difficult, if that is his platform on which he is running for president in 2024, to get anyone to vote for him other than those who, of course, are already committed to him. People don't want to vote for people who are out for retribution. They want to vote for people who are out to make their lives better. And I think if he keeps saying what he said last night, and it's consistent with what, of course, he has said previously, then this isn't going to backfire. It depends how he handles it. Let's see what happens. But certainly the opening salvo at Mar-a-Lago last night is that he's going to make this about him, and that's not what people vote for.
I'm not sure. He's always kind of made it about him, though, and people did elect him president in 2016. But yeah, none of us can really predict voter behavior sometimes. But let me come back to Jason, because when we talk about whether or not this could politically backfire, if we look at this potentially being another kind of Mueller report, but instead of no collusion, he can prove no criminality, no crime. Do you think that's how this could play out and it could work to his advantage?
I don't know if it can work to his advantage necessarily, because I think I agree with a lot of the points that Steve made, that this is about Trump. If Trump had taken a different tact and been more of even with what Adolfo is saying, is that, look, stick to the facts of what the charges are and how wrong they are, and that this can't happen to other people or shouldn't happen to other people, then I think we'd be in a different situation. I think now when you have people out there saying that, who else has been arrested during the week of Easter and equating Trump to God, it's just gotten out of control. So I think over time, and the fact that this case won't even be heard until December, there has to be some political calculations in this, because the first caucus is in January in Iowa during the middle of this trial. So my hope, quite frankly, is that we have other candidates that are out there that can actually embrace Trump's policies, but avoid the noise and the criticism and the attacks against Trump himself. Just let him deal with the cases as they are, and that hopefully we can move on to a different chapter in our political system. But At
Okay.
some point, we're all going to tire of Trump.
I'm not sure Adolfo would agree, but Adolfo, let me ask you, because Jason alluded to earlier the Georgia case. I want to hear your comments on that. What about the case in Georgia? It is very significant. These are alleged attempts to actually illegally overturn an election. Do you think that case actually loses momentum, especially if Trump wins in New York, as you think he will?
Well, I do think he will win in New York. I think these charges will be eventually dismissed, probably on appeal in New York. Okay, again, these are all allegations. Even the supposed case, haven't seen any indictment in Georgia. I haven't seen anything. But of course, there's a rush to already condemn President Trump. And there's a presumption here I'm not saying by the guests that are on the program, by many people, that Donald Trump is already guilty. Not just people, but the former Speaker of the House tweeted, Nancy Pelosi, that this is President Trump's opportunity to prove his innocence. And even the questions about this, I don't know if charges will eventually be brought in Georgia or not, but there's already this assumption this is all happening. The fact of the matter is this, politically, though, putting aside for the legal for a moment, to Jason's point, recent polling shows an enormous surge for President Trump. Enormous. He now leads everyone by triple digits in many cases. And in a field of 10 contenders, possible contenders, he's at 54%. And he's 30 points above DeSantis and growing, not to mention how much money he's raised. The fact of the matter is the Republican Party is united behind President Trump. 87% of Republicans support him, far higher number than Democrats for Joe Biden. So I think this is working to his benefit. We will see how this plays out. Unfortunately, this trial doesn't conclude on December 4th. There's a hearing on December 4th. The trial, if it moves forward, will be well into 2024. Part of the Democrat playbook here, and this is why this is a trumped up, no pun intended, charge by Mr. Bragg, is to actually have a black cloud over Mr. Trump in the 2024 elections. If he were the nominee, they very much want him to be the nominee. So this is a political exercise in persecution, and it's seen as such.
Steve, I want you to comment, though, if you can, on the initial question I had asked Adolfo there, and about the potential case in Georgia, as well as the Capitol riots. Was it a mistake, as Jason said, to push for the New York trial first, when he feels the other cases have much stronger merits?
Okay, no one pushed for the New York trial first. Each prosecutor is operating under their own independent schedule. Okay. You can make the case that it would have been stronger had Georgia gone first, because we all have heard Donald Trump pressuring the Secretary of State of Georgia to find 11,000 votes or whatever the number was that he needed to win the state. So we know he was engaged in discussions with Georgia state officials when the election was going against him. Whether he will be found guilty in a court of law is a different question, but we certainly know what he said because we all heard him say it. Now, you could make the case that in a way it was better that New York went first, because now we don't have this unprecedented nature of a former president having never been indicted. So that is no longer an issue. We see that the country survived his indictment and going into court yesterday and sitting at the defendant's table and having to plead not guilty. So we can survive a country as this, as many other countries like France, like South Korea, like Israel have had former leaders found guilty of crimes they have committed. So you can argue that maybe it's good that this went first. And you know what? By December, maybe Adolfo's right, and maybe the judge says the statute of limitations isn't there, or maybe he says this isn't a felony and let's just go with a misdemeanor. But we'll have all forgotten about that, because then the more serious cases against the people of the United States of America will be underway.
Jason, I could give you a minute for some final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not saying at all, Adolfo, that I think the Georgia case is a foregone conclusion. All I'm saying is that I think of any of the cases, that one seems to have the most, precarious position for Trump, in my view. I think as we move forward over the next several months, we'll be a good test of, the presidential campaign as it heats up. If Trump continues to make this about himself, it's going to suck the oxygen from the room. Just like when I was on Dr. Carson's campaign in 2015, we were the only ones that actually at one point led Trump during that campaign, and then that quickly went away after Trump attacked us. But the oxygen in the room in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, I think a lot can change over that time period. I think as candidates get into those states and start developing a base from which to, talk about the policies moving forward. The problem I think we're going to have is that until we have a candidate out there, and I don't think necessarily that DeSantis is the one, that they are talking about what we do for the future, and instead, are talking about Trump, then I think it is Trump again.
Jason Osborne, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Great discussion. And our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.